Everyone. Salam, Namaste, Adab. It is really a matter of great honor and pleasure personally to me in hosting Mr. N.Ram, um, long-time editor-in-chief of National Daily Hindu, the Hindu, and is still director of the entire Hindu publishing group. Um, he is considered as senior most and preeminent journalist in India, and his stand is very clear. He is a known crusader of secular ethos and of democracy. So I'm not going to take more time beyond this. Rather, we have invited Dr. Asim Siddiqui, senior professor and ex-chairman of English Department, Aligarh Muslim University, to have his opening remarks and introduce Mr. N.Ram. Dr. Asim Siddiqui.
Thank you, Raziz sir. Thank you, Rafa sir. Very good morning in United States of America, and of course, good evening in India. On behalf of Indian Diaspora, Washington, D.C., I wish you a very happy 2021. Undoubtedly, most people will remember 2020 for the pandemic that has permanently changed our life. But a very big chunk of Indian citizens will also remember 2020 for those peaceful but powerful protests against a very controversial act that was passed by the Parliament of India on December 11, 2019. Citizenship Amendment Act has made the entire Indian Muslim community insecure. The sense of insecurity, fear, and uncertainty is especially intense in the minds of young educated Muslims. The Act undoubtedly challenges the secular spirit of the Constitution. There are, of course, questions. Does this act try to help out the persecuted minorities of the neighboring countries, as has been claimed, or it is part of a larger plan? Is the devil in the details? Have we learned any lessons from the disaster we had in Assam after the implementation of NRC? And as hope is a very important thing in the life of everyone, what can give Indian Muslims hope for for a better future now? Of course, to talk more about these issues, we have with us India's foremost journalist, editor, public intellectual, and conscience keeper, Mr. N.Ram. For us, Mr. N.Ram is synonymous with The Hindu, a newspaper which most of us have grown up reading. He has nurtured the paper in various capacities, of course, as was just mentioned, as editor-in-chief, and of course, also as its top administrator and also its owner. I can say with pride that ever since the Hindu was available in Aligarh in the mid 1980s, I have been its regular reader. My day remains incomplete without its print edition, and I have read its print edition even during the pandemic. And of course, it was not with malice but with genuine appreciation that Mr. Kujwant Singh, that doyen of journalism, described the Hindu as the best newspaper in the world. The reason why the Hindu is so special and the reason why Mr. N.Ram is so special is that the Hindu has always spoken truth to power. When the Hindu carried a series of investigative stories on the Rafael deal, and mind you, it was against a very powerful government, the newspaper had to suffer in financial terms because of withdrawal of advertisements. The choice before the paper was to follow independent journalism or follow the government line. But Mr. N.Ram could say with full conviction, I will not bend. And of course, standing for the cardinal principles and ethics of journalism, he also firmly refused to reveal the source of his documents, even when faced with the threat of Official Secret Act. Earlier also, the Hindu has spoken truth to power with as much conviction. The paper broke the Bofors deal scandal during the period of Mr. Rajiv Gandhi. The powerful Jayalalitha government also was so perturbed by the newspaper that she filed cases against the Hindu. But of course, the Hindu would not bend. Mr. N.Ram is a man of many distinctions, numerous prestigious awards, national, international. There is a long list. He loves sports. He has a passion for literature. And he has also authored, of course, we have been reading his columns, but he has also authored two important books. One important book is Riding the Nuclear Tiger, and another is Why Scams Are Here to Stay. Riding the Nuclear Tiger examines the motivation and implications of India's Pokhran explosions in 1999. And of course, the other book, Why Scams Are Here to Stay, Understanding Political Corruption in India, explores the anatomy and pathology of corruption in India at all levels and in different institutions. As a student of literature, I am particularly thankful to the Hindu for nurturing the talent of one of my favorite writers, N.Ram. Mr. N.Ram's biography of R.K. Narayan, The Early Years, which is co-authored by him with Susan Ram, is a delightful read published by Penguin. In fact, I'm going to prescribe this book for my life writings paper for MA students in the next semester. And of course, there is a lot which can be said about the distinctions of Mr. N.Ram, but without wasting any more minute, may I invite Mr. N.Ram, our distinguished speaker, to deliver his address. N.Ram, sir.
Thank you very much, Professor Siddiqui, for that very kind introduction. And I also want to place on record my appreciation of the Indian Diaspora Washington, D.C. Metro, not just for inviting me on this occasion, but for the series of excellent talks and discussions that it has sponsored and organized with great efficiency and with great care. So I thank them for inviting me as well to speak on a subject which is, I think, of relevance, not just to Muslims of India, but to everyone who holds faith in the Constitution of India, of Republican India, and the values and principles that the Constitution embodies. India might have awakened to life and freedom at the stroke of the midnight hour separating August 14 and 15, 1947. However, as scholars have pointed out, 365 million subjects of King George VI were not magically turned into citizens as that midnight hour struck, and thereby hangs a complicated and checkered tale. The story of citizenship in India, in post-independent India, has several dimensions: historical, constitutional, legal, philosophical, socio-cultural, and political. They intersect, of course. My particular interest is in the evolving politics of citizenship in the sovereign, secular, democratic Republic of India. The Constitution, the transformative Constitution, and our democratic assets, by which I mean Parliament and state legislatures, the executive at the center and in the states, the judiciary, other institutions that function under constitutional or statutory authority, the news media, civil society organizations, and in the final analysis, we, the people of India, individually and collectively, all of us have a vital role to play in this. The Constitution has been designed not to strengthen or promote fealty to any strongman or any kind of majoritarianism, but to the core values of the Indian Republic as set out in the preamble: justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. Note that justice comes right at the top. How seriously the law and the courts of law take these values matters a good deal. But how society and the political system respond to them matters even more. I want to cite Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's last speech to the Constituent Assembly, made on November 25, 1949. In that speech, he brought out clearly and powerfully the importance of understanding the interdependence of the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, and getting what he termed termed the Union of Trinity Right. He warned against internal threats to democracy and society, such as bhakti or hero worship in politics, to which Indians were particularly addicted. It is quite possible, he mused, for this newborn democracy to retain its form, but to give place to dictatorship in fact. If there's a landslide, he said, referring no doubt to an electoral landslide, the danger of the second possibility, namely dictatorship, strongman worship, and so on, becoming actuality is much greater. In support of this argument, he cited or recalled John Stuart Mill's famous caution to people interested in the maintenance of democracy. And that caution was, do not lay your liberties at the feet of even a great man, or to trust him with powers which enable him to subvert their institutions. Equally important was Dr. Ambedkar's warning in this speech against letting the complete absence of two things in Indian society continue unchecked. These two things were, one, equality, social and economic, and secondly, fraternity. These he found to be completely absent in social life. He saw a contradiction between recognizing the principle of one man, one vote, and one vote, one value in politics. That's there. But denying the principle of one man, one value or equality in social and economic life. And he said in the speech that if this contradiction was not resolved, political democracy could not be expected to survive. And I think this speech surprised many, those who listened to it in the Constituent Assembly, as it wound up, or was beginning to come to its conclusion. But Dr. Ambedkar, I think, got it exactly right. And these reflections, warnings, and progressive ideas are of great relevance to the practice of democracy and, most important, the politics of citizenship today. But before getting into this subject substantively, let me enter a personal note. I was among the 365 million who did not magically become citizens when India awoke to life and freedom. You can look up my date of birth. Although I did not naturally realize it at that time, nor reflect on it until I was well into this subject, researching this subject. I was born a subject, not a citizen. It took me 2 years after that to reach the twilight zone in which I was properly neither a subject nor citizen. And then this was followed by an eventful and mostly dark pre-dawn interregnum, which lasted more than 2 years before I could claim real bona fide citizenship in the sovereign democratic republic constituted by we, the people of India. Or could I? After all, I was born in Madras, that is now Chennai, went to school and college there, voted there, married there, and in fact have lived there for all but 3 years of my student and working life. But can I establish this? I suppose I can. Taken individually, my Indian passport or my election photo identity card or EPIC or my Aadhaar card or my birth certificate, which is archived and downloadable from the Greater Chennai Corporation's digital repository, which bears the names of my parents and the correct date of my birth as I know it, but not my given name, which was quite common in the old days. This may not satisfy a bureaucratic mind swathed in red tape, nor will I think my academic degrees or reported cricket scores from my school or college days. But I seem to have sufficient combined documentation to prove my legal citizenship status, probably beyond reasonable doubt and at a minimum on the basis of what is known in jurisprudence as a preponderance of probabilities. But how many of us among India's current population of 1.38 billion have the documentation, the resources, and the stamina to prove our citizenship or right to citizenship by birth or descent or whatever to official bureaucratic satisfaction in an arbitrary, undemocratic, biased, and surveillance-oriented citizenship regime. This is a question I can raise from my own experience, or the experience of my own. I have enough documentation and questions around it. Before I go further, let me say a few words on my choice of subject for today's discussion, or rather on the connections made in the title of my talk. The title of my talk, between citizenship, the Constitution, and Muslims in the time of Hindutva. To illustrate and represent these aspects of my argument, I'll be making in this session, let me now present a few slides. They represent and illustrate some aspects that we shall be discussing today. And let me now share my screen. That's the title, Citizenship, the Constitution, and Muslims in the time of Hindutva. That is the cover of the original Constitution of India, which was, the calligraphy is by Prem Bihari Narayan Raizada, and the illumination is by the celebrated Nandalal Bose. This is actually a photolithographic representation of the original Constitution of the Republic of India. It's beautifully produced. I just want to connect it with citizenship, and soon, although forgive me for advertising, if you like, a book that is where I figure I contributed a chapter to it, but I think it's got some interesting material. The authors are it's going to be released very soon by Alep, published by Alep of New Delhi, and will be released perhaps in a couple of weeks. Rumula Thapar, Gautam Bhatia, a lawyer and constitutional scholar, Gautam Patel, a sitting judge of the Bombay High Court, and a very fine and upstanding judge, as many of you would know who have followed the law. The contents here would be of some interest to those who follow citizenship, particularly the opening chapter by Professor Rumila Thapar, a great historian, Citizenship, the Right to be a Citizen. And I have something on the evolving politics of citizenship, on which, in fact, I draw much of this lecture from the work I did for that chapter, Citizenship and the Constitution, and then Justice Gautam Patel's very fine concluding chapter or essay, Past Imperfect, Future Tense. And for those who follow this subject closely, I would recommend this collection of essays. Now, the second aspect, a component of this title of this talk, India's Muslims. I don't want to go into all these details because this is going to be available, but basically that is, we are talking about more than let's say 210 million Muslims as of now, roughly, just under 15% of India's population. It's grown, but quite slowly and steadily. It's a very diverse population, which is differentiated by, everybody knows, but it's worth reprising this. Differentiated by language, ethnicity, class, caste, which exists to a considerable extent, even among the Muslim population, and access to political and economic power. And the other figure is quite striking. Nearly half of Indian Muslims live in 3 states, Uttar Pradesh, West Bengal, and Bihar. The majority, as everyone knows, is Sunni, but there's a substantial Shia population. And Next is the important thing, I think, brought out particularly by the Sachar Committee report in 2006. For decades, this is a harsh reality. Muslims in India have faced systematic discrimination, prejudice, and violence despite constitutional protection. And this harsh truth is acknowledged in some official reports, and particularly that report by Bhimsen Chachar, the committee. And the BJP government has moved to limit these rights, among other things, and notably through the Citizenship Amendment Act. This slide is just for the record. Those of you who want to look at the growth of the Muslim population from 1951 to the last census in 2011, and then a current estimate, can look it up. I would really recommend this article written by an upstanding judge, recently retired judge of the Supreme Court of India, fairly recently, a couple of years ago, I think, published in the Hindu today about the so-called anti-love jihad ordinance passed in Uttar Pradesh. And please read this carefully. I've sent it to the organizers, Razi Saab, and the conclusion is, in short, it is unconstitutional. And the ordinance is prone to abuse, and we have seen its consequences: intimidation, bullying, arbitrary arrests, the loss of a fetus, ill-conceived, overbroad, and vague, vilifies all interfaith marriages, places unreasonable obstacles on consenting adults in exercising their personal choice of a partner, violates right to life, liberty, and dignity, and in short, Justice Lokur, retired Judge Lokur, concludes it is unconstitutional. But let us see how it fares when it's challenged in court. Already the Allahabad High Court has come up with a good judgment, upholding the right of two young people, a young Hindu woman and a young Muslim man, to marry. The state behaved very unjustly and in a very autocratic fashion, but justice was done in this particular case. There's no guarantee that it'll be done in all such cases, but we must be heartened by the fact that the Allahabad High Court has taken a very correct stand on this question. Then we come to violence, and I would cite this report brought out on what happened in Delhi, Northeast Delhi, in February of 2020, and it's a report brought out by the CPIM Delhi publication. I recommend this because it is very factual about what happened in Delhi, and one of the things that comes out very clearly, it was not a riot. It is incorrect to describe the communal violence as Delhi riots. I've forwarded a soft copy, a PDF of this very carefully done report to Razi Saab, and anyone interested, I'm sure, can get it from the organizers of this series. Please read it, and particularly the conclusions, and also the call for actions that require to be taken for justice. And that is these are some things that I just wanted to illustrate and represent what we are talking about when we are talking about the citizenship, the constitution, particularly the provisions relating to fundamental rights, the right to life, right to liberty, the right to practice faith, religion of your choice, or not to be religious at all, and so on, and the position of Muslims in India. It's not that the Muslim population as a whole is threatened. There are many states where Muslims and Hindus and other people belonging to other communities, religious communities, live in perfect harmony, where these issues do not come up. But the project, the Hindutva project, is to divide and target the so-called other. It's not a very small minority. That's why I cited those figures. And it's very differentiated. So there are a lot of strengths out there, but still the political project of Hindutva or Hindu Rashtra ideology, it's a whole project. It's been there for a very long time. They've bided their time, they've played the long game, and it is clear how Muslims figure in their scheme of things, the Muslim minority as a whole. It's not that they come under attack all the time. It's not that even that it is motivated by deep religious conviction of a bigoted kind. That may be a small part of it or a part of it, but it is a political project of communal mobilization for political ends and electoral ends. And this is how I think this is the perspective we need to have on this question about why from time to time there are laws that are discriminatory, apart from the systemic discrimination. Why Muslims in particular parts of the country like Uttar Pradesh, but also elsewhere, are targeted. Why there are lynchings. Why there was Gujarat in 2002. And if you want to come closer, why this whole, what happened, the communal violence in Northeast Delhi from February 23 to 29, 2020, 17 of the 28 town areas and one village in Northeast district of Delhi were ravaged by communal violence. I'm just quoting from the blurb of this book, which I referred to. 54 persons lost their lives. Property, homes, commercial establishments, schools were damaged or destroyed, and religious places were attacked. Several hundred people were injured. The aftermath of the violence has been equally traumatic, it says, and the processes for bringing justice to the victims, punishing those who instigated the violence, including some ministers and bigwigs, political bigwigs, are being blocked by a biased police investigation. And it's not just the CPM Delhi, which has said that. There are jurists, various others, retired civil servants and so on, who have brought this to the fore. The police are, I'm quoting again, are creating a narrative that paints the victims of the violence as the perpetrators and the people who worked for peace as instigators of that violence, while giving a clean chit to the rabble-rousers who gave incendiary speeches and provoked mobs towards violence. And the relationship of this to the Hindutva project has been brought out in this as well as many other reports, including journalistic reports. And that, I think, gives you the background to this discussion. Exploring the politics of citizenship over 7 decades in India must necessarily start with the question, what do we mean by the politics of citizenship? A citizen is generally defined in the theoretical literature as a member of a political community who enjoys the rights and assumes the duties of membership. Member of a political community who enjoys the rights and assumes the duties of membership. The dimensions of this membership are broadly classified as citizenship as legal status, defined by civil, political, and social rights, citizenship as political agency, and citizenship as a source of identity and belonging. These formulations sound very simple at the surface, but they hide a number of contradictions, tensions, ambivalences, fault lines, and also paradigm shifts in a globalized world. It's not just a problem it's not a problem just for India, but worldwide we can see these contradictions and tensions at play. And we have contentious interactions over the institutionalization and realization of substantive membership, legal status, rights, and participation. And this definition certainly fits what has happened in India over 7 decades. Our political history, insofar as it relates to citizenship, divides naturally into 4 chapters. I won't go into great detail on them, but just to flag them. The first begins with the making and provisioning of citizenship in Part 2 of the Indian Constitution at its commencement. And it takes us to the enactment of the Citizenship Act, the first law for regulating citizenship in 1955. Chapter 2 turns out to be a relatively quiet and stable period for citizenship, 1955 to 1985. Chapter 3 covers the period from 1986, when the citizenship law is amended to make special provision for Assam, which was referred to earlier, in line with the 1985 Assam Accord, up to 2003, 2004. That's a very important date, because the most significant and far-going changes were made to the legal political regime governing citizenship at that point of time, namely 2003, 2004. And the fourth, an ongoing chapter, encompasses what has been happening since December 3, 2004, and the earlier Citizenship Amendment Act 2003, and with it a new citizenship regime for which the foundations were laid in the earlier chapter came into force. Unless we understand this political background, we won't be able to understand what has happened in the most recent period, which is the most toxic period so far as citizenship is concerned. Let me start with the last chapter, post December 3, 2004, and what has happened since then. My position on this controversy over the Citizenship Amendment Act, I've written on this. Various others have also laid out their positions on it. Is very clear. I'll come to it in a minute. But the controversy, which has been in the making for decades and reached a boiling point in late 2019, will not go away. At its heart is the question whether Hindu communal majoritarianism, the concept of Hindutva put into practice, can be allowed to trump the secular character of the Constitution that forms part of its basic structure. A contentious issue that cropped up in the wake of partition in the Constituent Assembly debate, an issue that Jawaharlal Nehru called a little thing at that time, dust in the pan. That little thing, that dust in the pan, became a very big deal in 2019, 2020. Viewed in combination with two other citizenship-related projects, an amplified National Population Register exercise and the threatened countrywide National Register of Citizens, NRC. In combination with these, the Citizenship Amendment Act 2019 posed a direct challenge to India's democratic and secular polity, and, as important, a direct challenge to its political stability. No timeline has yet been set for the implementation of the All India NRC, which has been conceived and designed in law as a purely administrative project feeding off the population register. On the other hand, fieldwork for updating the National Population Register, except for Assam, alongside phase 1 of the census of 2021, was notified for implementation in all states and union territories between April and September 2020, but has unavoidably been postponed until further orders. The big deal, it became clear, had 4 separate but interrelated political components. 1, the provocative and polarizing enactment of the Citizenship Amendment Act 2019. The mass upsurge against it, seen in tandem with the National Register of Citizens and the NPR, the National Population Register, across much of the country. The repression and violence unleashed on the protesters by both the state and gangs of bigoted thugs. And 4, the potential crisis of federalism manifested by tensions and a possible showdown between several states and the central dispensation on the citizenship question. So you can see it is a very volatile and explosive mix, things coming together if it's truly to be implemented the way the Hindutva project has been conceived on the citizenship question. I don't want to get into any details on the constitutional and legal aspects, but I'll adopt as my position the following elegant argument presented succinctly by the lawyer Mihir Desai, an article in the Economic and Political Weekly. He says the CAA is unconstitutional, even if it is held to be constitutional by the Supreme Court of India, which of course is possible. The protest against it, he says, the protests against it are justified and should continue, despite even if the Supreme Court holds the CAA to be constitutional. If the CAA is held to be unconstitutional, and that's also possible by the Supreme Court of India, the NPR and NRC must still be opposed. Why? Because they are exercises that will be extremely detrimental, especially to the poor and marginalized. I will only add the lesson that lessons need to be learned from the updating of the original Assam NRC between 2013 and 2019. It proved to be a nightmare for millions of the state's residents, and it should serve as a warning to the rest of India and what a countrywide NRC would turn out to be, not for millions of people, not for tens of millions of people, but for hundreds of millions of people, especially the poor and the destitute, the illiterate, the semi-illiterates, those who do not have the resources to get the documentation necessary and so on. BJP leaders and their supporters and the central government have spoken in different voices, contradicted themselves on the question of how the population register relates to the register of citizens and also to the 2019-2020 changes in the citizenship law. The answer is very simple, and I think this is important, goes to the heart of what is happening today. The NPR has no purpose. The National Population Register has no purpose other than to serve as the basis, the data source for the National Register of Citizens. That's its only purpose. The NPR is a register containing details of persons usually residing in a specified locality, which may be a village or rural area or town or ward or demarcated area within a ward. And the specified particulars relating to each family and individual residing in a local area, including the citizenship status, will be collected through house-to-house enumeration. The NRC, this is important to understand, is an administrative exercise feeding off the population register, and it will be built up from below. There are processes for verification, publication of a draft, and filing of objections and appeals. But the power given to the local registrar to enter remarks in the population register, if he or she feels that the citizenship of an individual is, quote, doubtful, will be a Damocles sword hanging over the heads of millions of people. This underlines the authoritarian nature of the NPR-NRC project, and it becomes clear from a plain reading of the 2003 amendment to the Citizenship Act and the Citizenship Registration of Citizens and Issue of National Identity Card Rules 2003. These are technical things. I don't want to go into details unless there are questions of this. But the larger point is that this relationship, and in particular the chronology or sequencing, has been set out by no less than Amit Shah, then BJP president, in a series of election rallies in April, May 2019, before the elections. For example, at an April 22nd, 2019 election rally in West Bengal, he said, and I quote, "First we'll bring the Citizenship Amendment Bill and we'll give citizenship to the Hindu, Buddhist, Sikh, Jain, and Christian refugees, the religious minorities from the neighboring nations. Then we'll implement the NRC to flush out the infiltrators from our country. In BJP speak, in the context of the inflow from Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, infiltrator is code for Muslim illegal migrant, a term first introduced in the citizenship law by the 2003 amendment, and refugee is code for non-Muslim illegal migrant. The authoritarian and communal nature of this game plan, executed in stages, I underline again, not just recently, but between 2003 and 2019, and waiting to be completed with the implementation of the NPR NRC mega project, could not have been made clearer, the nature of this game plan. I think you have, to understand this question deeper, you have to go back to partition. I won't go into the details of that, but just to signify the importance of what happened then, I want to point out that initially in the Constituent Assembly debates, there was not much interest in the citizenship question. They took it for granted. But when you had partition, which was independence's twin, when it suddenly inserted the citizenship question into the proceedings of the Constituent Assembly, it did so as a set of problems to be tackled urgently. So from then on, from the time of partition, the matter is extensively and passionately debated, and the citizenship provisions made in Part 2 of the Constitution become operative at the commencement, that is on November 26, 1949. Politically speaking, these provisions, based on the legal principle of jus soli, citizenship by birth, are remarkably democratic, secular, and inclusive, given the historical circumstances. The implementation may have been flawed at times, deviating at times from the spirit of the provisions, particularly Article 7, but also Article 6, but they never defied the letter of the Constitution, which is resolutely opposed to using religion as a marker or religious difference as a basis for citizenship. There were points of view recorded in the debates of the Constituent Assembly, which recall for us some of the arguments that are taking place today. But given the extraordinarily difficult circumstances, one is only astonished by the fact that these arguments, some of them communal in nature, were resisted very strongly by the leaders, starting with Jawaharlal Nehru, Dr. Ambedkar, Alladi Krishnasamy Iyer, and various others, resisted it and put down voices that sounded some of the same themes that are being sounded today. And I think that is very, very important when we talk about citizenship. And the peoples of politically diverse India were by no means passive recipients of the right to vote or the right to citizenship. The Constitution, including its Part 2 provisions, is seen in some quarters, especially among the Hindu right, as something elitist or foreign inspiration imposed from above, out of tune with the civilizational genius of our people. It emerges from what we know now, that the peoples of India, drawn from different classes, castes, and ethnic groups, practicing different faiths, speaking different languages and dialects, living under a variety of political dispensations. 82% at that time could not read or write, but they had a central role to play in the making of electoral democracy and in the political construction of citizenship. And this is something that is to be marveled. It was a great chapter in the history of independent India, notwithstanding the terrible things that happened during partition. The Constitution does not attempt to define citizenship. What it does in Part 2 is answer the question, who is a citizen of India? It makes provision to cover different categories of persons who can claim this right or have the right. Article 5 matters most. Because it covers 98% of India's 1951 population of 361 million. It declares in one sweep that every person who at the commencement of the Constitution has his or her domicile in the territory of India and was born, or whose father or mother was born within the territory of India, or who had been ordinarily resident in the territory of India for no less than 5 years preceding such commencement, shall be a citizen of India. It is hard to imagine anything more democratic and inclusive than this provision based on the jus soli principle, citizenship by birth. Problems did arise with regard to millions of people covered by Article 6 and 7. And some members of the Constituent Assembly argued that preferential treatment should be given to Hindus and Sikhs because they said neither the Hindu nor the Sikh has any other place in the wide world to go to. But as I said, the political leadership, backed by an overwhelming majority, decided that there was no question of making religion a basis for citizenship. And Nehru in particular, and also Alladi Krishnasamy Iyer, invoked the principle of secularism to explain why those objections could not be sustained. And again, then the citizenship began to be, was legislated through the Citizenship Act of 1955, a fairly simple and straightforward law, provided for acquiring citizenship in 5 different ways: birth, descent, registration, naturalization, and incorporation of territory. But over the years, this changed. Citizenship by birth was transformed in various stages into a regime of citizenship by descent, and many controversies arose as a result. A new turn came in Assam, as everybody knows, in 1985-1986, with Section A introduced in the Constitution, and then restrictive and exclusionary elements of citizenship by descent intruded into the citizenship regime. Although the application of these features is confined to Assam, where violent agitation on the foreigners issue had forced the hand of the government, leading to the Assam Accord, this amendment, unfortunately, carried a broader political message. Assam you could treat as a special case with regard to the legal changes it brought about in India's citizenship regime. There's a substantial scholarly and journalistic literature available on this, so I won't go into it. Most political parties have accepted the insertion of Section 6A, special provisions as to citizenship of persons covered by the Assam Accord. The citizenship law, they supported it because they thought it was in the interest of peace and stability in the frontier state. But there is no getting away from the fact that 6A anticipates significant closures on the right to citizenship, and also to an attenuation of citizenship through a denial or deprivation of political rights. The right to vote was also taken away. And this, I think, is an important turning point. And you know what happened at the end of the day? The prolonged nightmare of Assam's NRC first saw 4 million people left out in the cold. Eventually, it was pared down to 1.9 million people, casting a dark shadow over the legal status, the fundamental civic and political rights, and the future of millions of people who live in the state, including those who are born and raised there. Paradoxically, of this 1.9 million, the majority seem to be non-Muslims, Hindus, and that has introduced problems for the Hindutva project. They don't know how to get out of it because there's a lot of opposition in Assam to excluding Hindu illegal migrants from this. I must mention here that the role of the Supreme Court of India, under the direction and helmsmanship of Chief Justice Ranjan Gogoi, it turned is very unfortunate. The court turned itself into an executive court, directing, micromanaging, implementing the NRC updating, and reviewing its own implementation in secrecy through a jurisprudence of sealed covers and confidential reports. And this aspect has been powerfully highlighted, analyzed, and criticized by Gautam Bhatia, the constitutional scholar, the legal scholar I referred to earlier. And the situation in the ground in Assam has been made much worse by the fact that two parallel processes are going on over the citizenship question. And this, I think, is worth noting. The proceedings before the foreigners' tribunals and the NRC. And as Gautam Bhatia points out, while the processes are nominally independent, they bleed into each other, causing great chaos and confusion for individuals who have found themselves on the wrong side of one or both. And these foreigners' tribunals, or FTs, in many cases are laws unto themselves. A law unto themselves. They are also quasi-judicial proceedings. They are marred by arbitrariness, a lack of competence, bias, and violations of the principles of natural justice. It's got so bad that it invited expressions of concerns over human rights violations from special rapporteurs of the United Nations Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights. Amnesty International has issued a detailed briefing titled "Designed to Exclude" on how courts are allowing foreigners' tribunals to render people stateless in Assam. And most disturbingly, Genocide Watch has gone so far as to issue an alert on what was happening to very large numbers of people of Bengali origin, not just Muslims, many Muslims, but also others in the state under the combined onslaught of the NRC and the foreigner and FTs. And official data towards the end of 2019 reveal that more than 1,000 people who have been declared foreigners and effectively rendered stateless by the foreigners' tribunals are languishing in Assam's 6 detention centers. We don't have up-to-date figures, but that was in 2019. 30 of them, all desperately poor, illiterate, or barely literate, had died up to that point. And this, I think, is a real problem on our hands. And imagine what will happen if this is scaled up to cover all of India. So finally, citizenship in the time of Hindutva, in the time of BJP. Over the past 3 decades, citizenship and its antithesis, alienness, have become highly sensitive, bitter, contested states of legal and political being, not just in India, but in many nation states, developed as well as developing. Those of you who live in the United States know how it plays and how the extreme right has exploited this issue, but not just the extreme right, even other parts of the polity, how they have failed to do justice to this issue, and how it's very easy for demagogues, particularly those belonging to the far right, to divide people on these lines, to turn people, to divert attention from major issues by turning people against the other and hurling at them a choice of epithets, infiltrators, aggressors, even termites, which was used in India, terrorists, and where they can get away with it, as in the US, overtly racist slurs. From time to time, there has been repression, violence, and a variety of human rights abuses resorted to by state as well as non-state political actors as means to terrorize and intimidate undesired aliens, teach them a lesson, and keep them in their place. And this is the Hindutva project. After a long period of ideological preparation and political conditioning by the Hindu right, the mass-based Bharatiya Janata Party, and the Sangh Parivar, the many-armed formation directed semi-secretively by the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh to advance the concept of Hindutva as well as the long-term project of Hindu Rashtra. Given this, India finds itself in the front ranks of countries where the citizen-alien contestation has turned toxic. And I've looked at all the BJP manifestos, election manifestos, and looked at how the citizenship issue, citizen versus alien issue plays there. And it is clear that alongside the BJP's rise and alongside the decline of institutions in India and alongside the decline of the political, of the Congress and several other opposition parties, this issue has taken off. But parties like the Congress cannot escape from their responsibility, their accountability for making very negative inputs into this question, into this debate. For example, the NRC done before the BJP came to power. They still don't have an explanation of why they did this. So various political elements shared in this kind of chauvinism, wittingly or unwittingly in some cases. And today we are where they are. From 1989, the BJP has made significant progress in the mass political arena, owing largely to the effectiveness of the Ram Janmabhoomi campaign. What was that? Demolish a mosque, a 16th century mosque, and build a Ram temple on the grave of the mosque. That was essentially the project. And unfortunately, that has been upheld by the highest court in the land. Perhaps they recognize current reality or whatever be the rationalization. It's a very strange episode in the history of a country that has a secular and democratic constitution. Hindutva has gained ground since then. And although the original inspiration for a countrywide NRC came from Assam, the idea itself goes a long way back to the founding of the RSS. What is India? How do the minorities, how do they figure in this project? Going back to Savarkar and Golwalkar and so on. I think there's quite a literature on this question. But if you look at the election manifestos themselves, sometimes it's played in low key. Sometimes it's presented as a problem of just Assam and the Northeast and West Bengal. At other times, it's blown up so that the specter of the so-called illegal, the infiltrator, as opposed to the refugee. This is an important thing going back to some of the voices in the Constituent Assembly, where the infiltrator is someone else, is the other. The refugee is our person. Treat them differently. That was not possible earlier, but because of the gains made by the Hindutva project, alongside the rise of authoritarianism, the hero worship, strongman politics, majoritarian thinking, success in winning over the influential sections of the middle classes, and even the most oppressed communities in some cases, Dalits and tribal folk in some states. All this has come together and emboldened them to push through this whole project, using religion as a marker for citizenship and making and using religious difference as a basis for citizenship itself. And alongside political citizenship, all the rights, civic and political rights and legal rights that come from it. And this is the story of what has happened. Interestingly, a pandemic came in, trumping, for the time being at least, the project that they had undertaken. We can only speculate on what might have happened had COVID-19 not made its entry into the world and to India, completely changing the game right now. We can't be complacent, but we must recognize that today, very few people talk about the citizenship issue because it seems so far away at the time of the pandemic. But there's no room for complacency because this is a long-term project. And so we do have, it's very clear that we are in danger of having a citizenship regime that is arbitrary, undemocratic, biased, and surveillance oriented. That is the regime they want to impose on us today. And in attempting to find answers to these questions, difficult questions in some cases, for example, in Assam, political India has lost its way. The reasons for this are complex. It's enough to say there have been huge democratic and governance deficits in handling citizenship aspirations and dreams, contentious issues over the right to citizenship that have cropped up across a vast and diverse land. But also important are the inability to deal democratically and justly with internal contradictions, tensions, and conflicts. Failure effectively to manage relations with neighboring countries, especially those that have a common borders with India. Opportunism in dealing with chauvinist movements and tendencies, and of course, unchecked advance of communalism as a political mobilization strategy, notwithstanding all those provisions made in our Constitution and sometimes upheld by the Supreme Court of India, some of these principles. And one thing that has happened in the most recent period is showing up the limits of power, what they can do. And the farmers, both the anti-CAA protests, which led to their own, a lot of violence later on from the state and non-state political actors. And more recently, the farmers' agitation have shown the limits of power of those who seek to seize more power during an emergency like a pandemic. And as an article in the New York Times pointed out several months ago, I know Razi Saab and various others read the New York Times. He said, along with the Hindu. So this article was interesting, and it had implications for strongman politics. And you know who I'm referring to in your case. The virus cannot be arrested, censored, or outlawed. And reverting to the strongman standard playbook to project an aura of control is a risky strategy for a chaotic crisis. I'm quoting from that article, that it showed up the limits of political and state power in India, but also in countries like the United States. And as this article puts it, the virus cannot be arrested, censored, or outlawed. And reverting to the strongman standard playbook to project an aura of control is a risky strategy for a chaotic crisis. Clearly, this has had a bearing on your recent presidential election. Could be one of the factors. And this is one of the unintended consequences of the pandemic crisis. It could also show to advantage the resilience, the virtues, the benefits, and the power of democratic citizenship when it is able to assert its civil, political, and social rights and actively perform its duties and responsibilities for the common good. By their individual and collective actions, citizens, including Indian citizens, exercising political agency intelligently and resourcefully, can strive not just to cope, but actually to find a moral and political way forward during this crisis, this twin crisis, the crisis of health and the crisis of the threatened collapse of the economy, with its devastating impact on the lives of the working people, especially the unorganized and the marginalized. Citizens can use this time to reflect on and reset perspectives on what secular, democratic, rights-bearing citizenship means in the contemporary world and what needs to be done to find a way back to the core values of the Indian Republic as set out in the preamble to the Constitution. And I come back to those 4 words: justice, liberty, equality, fraternity. If a critical mass of ordinary people succeed in doing this, democratic India will find itself in a stronger position when the situation returns to some kind of new normal to shape the future of citizenship, not in the way dictated by Hindutva and Hindu Rashtra ideology or other extreme right projects, including projects that Muslim extremism or fundamentalism may come up with conceivably, but in the direction chartered by the constitution makers. And on this note, I'd like to end. I think I've taken more time than was originally assigned to me, but this is a complex subject, and I'm open to questions and comments and criticism for what I've presented.
Thank you very much, Ram Saab. I mean, you could have taken much more if you want. Subject really demanded it, but no, it's really very educational, very informative, and very brave of you to say the words. And we are here everywhere, here or in India, listening to you, and there's a lot to do. There's a lot to learn, a lot to come together. And such sessions are needed. A lot of people have attended, and I'm sure that there are a lot of questions for you. And so the next part is Dr. Rafat Hussain will moderate the question and answer session, and he will choose the questions as he feels fit, because there will be a lot of questions. And then he will ask people how to proceed. Okay, Rafat?
Thank you, Rajibai. And thank you, Mr. Ram. And it was a beautiful analytical dissection of Hindutva ideology, or you can say the current status of India. And I'm pleased to inform you that this is one of the highest attending talks, and there are hundreds of people attending. And there are two ways of asking the question. As I said in the beginning, you can raise your digital hand or put your interest in the chat box. And I have noted the several names who wanted to ask question, although there are hundreds of nice comments about your talk, and those names are not noted. And as I said, there are two ways: raise your digital hand or put your question in the chat box. And one thing, very humbly, I request you, Ram Saab, that please be brief, because there are too many questions to answer. And same request goes to all the people who wants to ask question. Just no commentary, please. Just ask your question, and Ram Saab will be brief, because I have more than 20 names already noted as they appeared in the list. So first name is Ashok Batra Saab. This is our regular attendee, Ashok Saab.
Yeah, good afternoon to everyone and Happy New Year. My question is very simple. We know what's going on in India, and what is the way out? Another question I have, that what is the role of RSS? My understanding is they are infiltrating in all the administrative offices of India.
Yes, do I answer now?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, I think that is true, that there's been deep infiltration of many institutions, but there's no need to get disheartened, because there is also a fair degree of resistance in states and within those institutions. Massive power is being exercised by the state, by state power on these institutions, including the judiciary. And in a few days, we'll be having a discussion at the India International Center on the 7th, actually, on the independence of the judiciary, where Justice Madan Lokur will be one of the main speakers. I'm also part of that. That's one example, but the civil service, the bureaucracy is infiltrated. Scientific institutions are also sought to be infiltrated, but there is a fair degree of resistance as well. The media are being put under tremendous pressure. If reporters or people editing the copy are not being compliant with what the central government wants, pressure is put on proprietors. Advertising is being used as a means of disciplining the media or controlling the media. And I think if you just listen to some of the TV discussions on television or read of some of the articles in print, this becomes very clear. But there is there is space for dissent, there is space for criticism, and everything has not been suppressed. So I think we've got to play the long game as they have done. There's no guarantee that this will go away very soon. The only option is to fight, and fight in a proper way, using all legal means. And the farmers' agitation has, I think, provided already several lessons of how you can be very firm in your demands while being flexible in talking to the government. They've repeatedly gone back, but the demand is repeal those 3 farm laws. Then we'll talk seriously. No point in saying we'll set up a committee or we'll examine it and so on, because once the momentum of the protest is lost, it's going to be very hard to go back to it. So I think they are being smart, and the government is under considerable pressure. There are also state governments which do not fall in line, which I think makes it more difficult for the Hindutva project to be imposed everywhere. I can speak particularly about my state, Tamil Nadu, where I think the BJP has very little of an electoral base. They're trying hard to ride piggyback on some other parties with a mass basis. But there are states like that, and in particular Tamil Nadu, Kerala, for example, so on. But elsewhere, they have made gains. So no easy answer to the question of how we can get out of this situation. They're in.
Thank you, Mr. Ram. I'm going to name next few people so they get ready, and Faisal can unmute them if they are unable to unmute themselves. So a couple of names: Muhammad Yunus, Rashid Mutala, and Amrana. So first, Muhammad Yunus. Please unmute yourself. Faisal.
I have sent a request to unmute.
Okay, so please, can you take out that request so people can unmute themselves?
Meanwhile, you can move to other questions.
Yeah. So the next person, Rashid Mutala, please.
Okay. Thank you very much for a very enlightening. But what I'd like to mention that.
Okay. Faisal, unmute mute these people.
That was Muhammad Yunus, so I muted him back.
Sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead.
As I was saying, thank you very much for a very relevant and interesting discussion. What I'd like to say that the Mughals or Muslims ruled India for centuries, and the Hindus or the other minorities were not sidelined at all. However, now, just in one term, we find that the BJP is sidelining the Muslims to such an extent they want to send them out over the border and make them into non-entities and non-citizen and persona non grata. So what is your comment on this, and how do we proceed from this? What is your suggestion?
Fortunately, it would be impossible to marginalize Indian Muslims. The sheer number, I mentioned close to 210 million is the current estimate. And the diversity of the Muslim population, their roles in national life, the educational capabilities that are being developed. I can certainly speak to what's happening in the southern states. Muslim women are educating themselves and being given opportunities to educate themselves in a big way in several states, particularly in the south, I'm sure also in Western India. And all this is going to just rule out any possibility of marginalizing Muslims or making them non-citizens. That's not what I'm suggesting. It's the pressure, the uncertainty, the anxiety, the trauma that people will suffer, particularly the poorest among them. I think that's a matter for...
Faisal, this is, please keep the other people muted because there are so many questions and I am busy in...
I've allowed them to unmute and that's why they're unmuting. So let me take that out then.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. The next person is Amrana.
Sorry, I don't think he answered my question.
That's okay.
Okay.
I don't think my question has been answered. Maybe I should just rephrase it so that you understand what I'm trying to ask. And that is to say that just like we find that in the Middle East, the Israeli government initially brings in small touches of laws which slowly erode the liberties of the people. And now you find that the Palestinians are in the condition that you find themselves. Similar things have been tried in India, in so-called Kashmir, and is now spreading throughout UP, etc. My question is, what are we going to be able to do to overcome this overwhelming fascist government of Modi?
Ram Saab, please be brief. There are, because I show you, there are so many questions, full page.
I don't want to enter into these comparisons because they're not very helpful. That, you have to go into the Palestinian question. I think they're very different.
Okay, leave that out. Answer the second part of the question.
Okay,
then.
so next, go ahead. Sorry. Next person is Amrana, please.
Yeah, don't encourage, please. Only
yeah,
one.
Because if a speaker is not interested, then you can't force them.
Sure.
Okay. The next person is Amrana and then Umaid Inamdar. Amrana, please.
Hi. So my question was regarding the financial power of the BJP and their IT cell. And considering the mass amount of money that comes in from the West to support the BJP because of their financing law that they passed for elections that allowed for this money to come in, can you talk a little bit about that and how, if there's any way to curtail that or to maybe help the opposition parties with
Thank you, Amrana. Thank you, Amrana. Please go ahead.
You're referring to the electoral bond scheme, but that is one of the sources of finance. There are also corporate donations and so on. The BJP gets an overwhelming share of this. The others are simply not in the game so far as electoral financing is concerned. Speaking for India as a whole, I think in the name of transparency, this was grotesque. Making it possible for anonymous donors to buy, these are like bearer bonds, and you go and give that bond, those bonds to a particular party, and nobody will know the identity of the donor. And it has been pointed out that this is a way of legalizing kickbacks. Hypothetically, the government could do a favor to a big player, an industrialist or trader or whatever, and instead of giving a straight bribe for which you may be prosecuted under the Prevention of Corruption Act, you can now legally pay back or give a kickback in the form of an electoral bond. This doesn't operate year-round. It operates for particular limited periods proximate to elections, but that's one way the BJP has subverted electoral laws, and the Election Commission seems to be helpless. The matter is up before the Supreme Court. It's been challenged, and typically for this period, the court has not found it fit to make speed on this matter. It could have easily disposed of this question, but again, because it's turned into an executive court as Gautam Bhatia sees it, I think issues like that are not taken up the way they should. So it is a huge question that this party has an overwhelming share of the finances raised for elections. There are limits. I think they make an ass of the law when you talk about limits on electoral finance. People can be disqualified for small breaches, but this is This is something that has completely subverted the concept, the idea of a level playing field in electoral spending.
Thank you. Thank you. And unless it's a burning question, because I think we won't be able to accommodate all the questions because there are already 20 people lined up. So I request you not to ask the question or put your name in a request. Next person is Umaid Inamdar, and then Anwar Akhtar and Mohammad Asrar. So go ahead, Umaid Inamdar.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I like to congratulate Indian Diaspora Washington DC for conducting this wonderful session, and Mr. Ram also for very enlightening talk. Sir, I just want to ask a question that considering this fascist regime and communal scenario, would there be a different scenario if some people had more voting power? I mean, like judges, civil servants, against one man, one vote system. Thank you.
No, that's not, that issue is, that's not in question at all. I think we have one person, one vote, and one vote, one value, and that's there to stay. I'm for it, and in any case, nobody's going to change that. You can't have a system of weighted voting, differential weights for votes for particular sections and so on. That's simply not on. And it's simply ruled out of court.
Thank you. Anwar Akhtar.
My question was like what you just said, one person, one vote, but we don't find that in the United Nations. It's only Eurocentric, and much of the population lives elsewhere. And how do you think we can challenge the UN?
I don't think I'd like to. I will be able to answer this question within the time available here, and it's completely unrelated to the subject I discussed. I respect the question. It is relevant, but that's for another day and another discussion.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next person, Mohammad Asrar. Please be brief. And after that, Imtiaz and Hakim. Go ahead, Mohammad Asrar Saab. Okay, next person is Imtiaz Saab.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ram, for your very insightful and illuminating presentation. I have been here in the United States since 1972, and I have lived through the days of partition. I was 12 years old when partition took place, and I still remember the horrors of what was happening at that time. I have always believed that the partition of India was a great tragedy, and I always have a desire that India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, possibly Afghanistan could form a union of South Asian countries like the European Union. Any possibility in this decade?
No,
Thank
I think nothing suggests that that could happen. But certainly you could have a cooperative framework. You have SARC, which can be given more content and so on. But unfortunately, religious passions, chauvinism, and also past history work against this. But we have to try. We need good relations among all neighboring countries in our region. And sometimes our governments have tried, sometimes they fail. The governments of neighboring countries, some of them have done well, but they have also blundered. So I think we are in an unenviable situation as a region, the South Asian region, SARC region today. Of course, it doesn't affect relations among all countries, but particularly India, Pakistan. I think that's, and I'm not talking about India, China here. I think that it's going to be difficult. So a question of a union, it's not it's not realistic.
Thank you. Thank you. Hakim Saab, and then Sayyida Zainab, and after that Salman Qureshi. Hakim Saab.
There's nobody named Hakim. Maybe he's left.
Okay, next Sayyida Zainab. And Ram Saab, you can answer question in 1 or 2 sentences because I have promised a lot of people.
Who's after Sayyida Zainab?
Salman Qureshi, Poras Dada Bhai.
Acha.
Okay, so keep going. And the next person is Tariq Farooqi. Please unmute Tariq Farooqi. Faisal?
Ji, I have unmuted all 4 of them.
Unmuted.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thanks for a scholarly presentation. I've got 2 short questions. In spite of so many setbacks and mass protests that you referred to, BJP keeps winning elections. Why is this so? Second question, as you already mentioned also, South India has so far resisted the extreme right. Will it hold in the future? Thanks.
Thank you.
First, I hope so, and I'm quite confident that for the conceivable future that we can hold the fort against communalism as a political mobilization strategy. But that fort has already been breached in Karnataka, and where it's difficult for the South. On the first question, what was that?
Tariq Bhai, repeat, please. First question, Tariq
Yeah,
Bhai.
it was muted again. So the first question was, in spite of so many setbacks and mass protests that's going on, and you referred to some of them, the Kisan movement and so on, the BJP keeps winning elections. Whenever there's an election, they still win. Economy, they're not doing well. So many other factors, they're not doing well, but still doesn't matter. Modi is still the I think the most popular brand in India. So why is that so?
That is the reality today, and many of us who expected otherwise were disappointed after demonetization, after all kinds of economic blunders pointed out by economists like Raghuram Rajan and some of their own advisors. Yes, and most recently in Bihar, where polls suggested that the opposition alliance could win. I think there's something going on here that's quite deep. One is the charisma of Mr. Narendra Modi, no question about it. And on the other side, the weakening of leadership, particularly the Congress, a very reluctant leader as Congress president, a party in disarray, in clear decay in many Hindi-speaking states, regional parties that have got into trouble, and the BJP moves on. They've got a, they've got a whole system in place. They work hard. They plan much in advance. It's not just the BJP winning like that, not just Modi. The RSS, I know what happened in places like Tripura. They went in 2 years before the election, and volunteers worked. They infiltrated the political system. They're truly infiltrators coming in from other parts of India, and they worked. So I think it's going to take a lot of resources, effort, hard work to undo these effects. But there are surprises from time to time. Suddenly, the sudden strengthening of the opposition in Bihar is worth noting as well, and that points to possibility that breaches could occur in the BJP forts and the strongholds. But this is going to be, this is for the long haul.
Thank you, Ram Saab. Thank you.
At the moment.
Yeah, thank you. Second call for Poras Dabhoy. If he's not there, the next is Muhammad Zulkarnain. And the next is Rashid Nihal and Haris Azmi. So any one of them, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, this is Poras Dadaboy. I'm with the Citizens Advocacy Center in Chicago, Illinois. I have 2 questions. Question number 1 is, all the riots and the trouble is inherent because of police corruption. 85% of the population says you have a corrupted police department nationwide. That's one reason why you have problems. I'd like you to answer that and how you intend to fix that. And the second question is, your country doesn't use the Open Meetings Act. It is not a part of your constitution, and it is not being used. As a result, the government can run ramrod. So how would you address Open Meetings Act and police corruption to improve?
Well, I've done, as was mentioned earlier, I did a little book on corruption, political corruption in India, and I don't think you can simplify it to and fix on just one factor like police corruption. It is there, but it's a very complex subject, and I don't think it's possible to just say yes to that. And as for the second aspect, I haven't followed it.
Open Meetings Act is a method which is used across the United States, and any political organization or any political body, municipal, state, or federal, has to have open meetings where people can come in, ask questions, and make comments. I don't think you have the Open Meetings Act in India.
Yeah, not a comprehensive act. There are requirements in some cases that you have meetings, and transparency is required, but we do not have an act of the kind, a comprehensive act of the kind we have. That you have.
Thank you. Next person. And you are allowed to ask only one question, please, because there are too many people lined up. Mohammad Zulkarnain and Rashid Nihal, Haris Azmi. Faisal, you are checking those names?
I asked all three to unmute, but so far they haven't.
Okay. Ahmad. Next person is Ahmad. By screen name Ahmad, and another is screen name HP. And please be brief.
Okay, I've unmuted both of them.
Okay, I keep going.
Hello, this is Ahmad. Thank you very much for this
Go
very
ahead,
informative call. My question is, can your organization do something to organize de-saffronization or de-Hindutva information campaign? Or if you are already doing this, how can we lend our hands to it?
I think there is a lot of criticism in some serious criticism in the press, and we have some very fine scholars, historians, and other social scientists who do question the basis of Hindutva. There's quite a large literature on the question. I referred to Romila Thapar, and there are many others, Irfan Habib, and so on. They have a job. So India is pretty well served by serious scholarship on this issue.
Yeah.
But a one-stop de-saffronizing project has not been thought of anywhere. I think it has to come from multiple sources. And we have to make it clear that when you fight communalism, you have to be consistent. Fundamentalism, communalism, extremism, from whichever source it comes from, we have to be even-handed in dealing with it. And I spoke exclusively about in this discussion on majority, these trends coming in the name of majoritarianism, but there are also minority communalism, and you can see parties like the Muslim League in Kerala. I think what's the need to have a political party calling itself the Muslim League in this day and age? So they also, and that plays into the hands of majoritarian communalism. They feed off each other, and we've not had an occasion to discuss it. But I think it is important for Muslims and other minorities to integrate themselves, at least politically, into whichever party you want to join. And in most cases, I think not too many Muslims will join the BJP party, which is overtly committed to Hindutva. But they have to. Fortunately, the Muslim League exists only in a few places in India. It's a remnant from the past, but they've got to move on and enter the political mainstream instead of just using these issues. Some of them very narrow issues in particular regions of a state such as Kerala. I think all this has to be remedied and overcome in this way. And the project of it's de-saffronizing, but it's also decommunalizing. It's to it's to remove all sources that divide people on wrong lines.
Thank you, Ram Saab.
And the Muslims like you, enlightened, liberal, progressive Muslims, I think have a duty to campaign hard for this process, which I would call political mainstreaming, coming into the system, regardless of your ideology or outlook.
Thank you. So next person is Haris Azmi and Faisal. Note the few names and HP by screen name HP, and then Faisal, Ejaz Ahmad, John Rizvi. Thank you. Go ahead, Haris Azmi, please.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to host this session and giving me an opportunity to ask this question. I think the question I really had was answered in bits and pieces from other questions. So I'm not going to ask that question. So I'm going to change it last minute, because what I would love to understand, given the fact that, one way to put it is we are the largest minority, or the other way to look at it, which is what I prefer as an overseas citizen, I consider myself a citizen of the country, India, is that we're the second largest majority, right? And that was the case ever since the partition. And there was a lot of hope for the people to come together and work together to make that country great again. But clearly we find ourselves, especially the Muslim community, find itself today in the state that it is. So according to you, I would love to understand, what do you think went wrong? Like, if we had a chance to go back in time, what would you suggest we fix or not do or do so that we avoid a situation like this that we find ourselves today?
Thank you, Haris. We got
it. I think impossible to answer that in a short time, but I would welcome a discussion.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Faisal, you have a question, Faisal, or is it another Faisal?
That's another Faisal. I have requested him to unmute.
And Ejaz Ahmad, John Rizvi, and Fazal Khan.
Yeah, thanks a lot. This is Ejaz here. I hope I'm audible. I'm dialing in from London. So, Ram sir, thank you so much for a very enlightening session. In fact, we might need a follow-on session to focus more about what exactly the Indian diaspora living abroad, people like us in UK, in US, can do. I know it can't be answered in a very brief, but if you can have a follow-on workshop for that, that will be really wonderful.
Thank you.
Concrete actions. Yeah.
Thank you. And I just wanted to inform you that I'm not noting any more names in the last 10 minutes because the questions keeps coming. So because we won't be able to accommodate all of them because it's too late in India. So, next person is John Rizvi, please. And then Fazal Khan and Nahid. Fazal bhai?
Good evening.
Okay, go ahead. John Rizvi.
Good evening. This is John Rizvi. Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. So I live in India and incidentally in a BJP ruled state. Now they have started some out of the blue. They have started some questionnaire activity, which they are naming as Parivar Pehchan Patra. So which a lot of citizens think that this is a precursor to the NRC or NPR, whatever. Mostly, majorly NRC. So as common citizens, what should be our response and reaction to such pressurized questionnaires? Like from all corners, we are going pressurized to fill up these questionnaires.
I don't know what specifically this exercise is.
Like suppose something starts.
I don't think it would have anything to do with the National Population Register. That's the thing to watch. In fact, Amit Shah recently went on record to say that we'll take it up only after the pandemic ends. Nobody knows when it'll end. I don't think this is related. It could be related to the NPR. NRC, as I said, is only an administrative project where they feed off the data information gathered by the National Population Register, which is house to house. So the thing to really watch out for is the NPR right now. And I don't think they'll be able to implement it in the conceivable future. But I don't really know what the exercise you're referring to is. Yeah.
Thank you, Ram Saab. And Rashid Nihal Saab is back. Please go ahead. Otherwise, Fazal Khan.
Yeah. first of all, let me
No,
congratulate.
please ask the question. No commentary, please. No background. We all know the background. Most of us know the background.
Fine.
Yeah, just direct question, please.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. N.Ram ended his talk with his analysis, saying that it's a very complex subject. Now, when the issue of citizenship comes, historically, citizenship has always been seen in the angle of three factors, mostly. The first one is migration issues, and the second one is linguistic communities coming, and the third one is the internally displaced community coming. Now, with this, your analysis, whether the issue is a complex one or it has been made complex by the communities, by the political setups. Because when you say it's a complex one, what exactly you mean by this concept?
Well, complex, historically very complex. Partition came in. There was enough, lot of large numbers of Muslims fled India or emigrated to Pakistan and Bangladesh, and there was a flow the other way as well. Those figures are available. And also there have been regional movements like the Assam movement, the anti-foreigners agitation, which turned very violent. It target, that was linguistic, wasn't it? Or ethnic, non-Assamese, particularly Bengalis, whether Hindu or Muslim, were equally unwanted and targeted during that agitation. So ethnicity, language, that also figured. It's a very complex issue. And also the laws have been very complex. I gave the example of two parallel processes, the NRC and the foreigners tribunals in Assam, bleeding into each other and causing tremendous confusion. And the Assam issue itself is very complex. But so it's a complex issue. I think it's being mishandled also.
Thank you, Ram. Thank you. Fazal Bhai, please.
I don't see Fazal Bhai there. Maybe he has dropped. I see somebody with the screen name Nahid and Imtiaz ready for the next question. They are unmuted.
Okay, Nahid was there. Yes. Go ahead, Nahid. And Habib Hussain and Danish Khan. Ram Saab, how much time do you have? How much time you can afford to give us?
As long as the interest lasts.
There is a lot of interest. I still have another page, but let's go quickly. Habib Hussain, Nahid, please.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask you one thing. But the way it has happened in Assam, there were so many Hindus who were found fitting into this NRC, etc. So what will happen if it is done in the whole of the India? I am scared that there will be more Hindus than Muslims, because 80% population is of Hindus and most of them are poor, illiterate. How are they going to prove that they are the national or citizens of India?
Yeah,
and moreover,
thank you.
I'm glad you asked.
Nahid, one question is enough.
I'm glad you asked this question, because it really, when you come to think of it, it's just impossible to execute this project. It's only to put pressure. It's just impossible to carry through this exercise across the whole of India, involving 1.3 billion population as of now, and that even if you take only the heads of the families, so-called heads of the families there, it's a huge number. It's just impossible to implement.
Thank you. Habib Hussain.
Mr. Ram, I'm from Chennai and from not very far away. My question is, if you had to hold a mirror up to us, Indian Muslims or Muslims in general, what's the one thing that you would say that we're not doing right?
We are not doing right. Too many things. Go ahead, Ram Saab. Just say one thing which opens our eyes, although we are a dead community.
Yeah, I think in our state, our friend referred to, Muslims are politically integrated. The Muslim League exists only on paper. Leagues. So I think that's one area where they've done right. One thing, I think Muslims have done very well in the fields of education, particularly in South India, and perhaps elsewhere also. They have to strive harder to get into the state services, the army, the police. But some of them have done very well there also. We've not had a Muslim chief of staff, for example, so that's an aspiration there, and so on. But we see things changing.
So Ramsa, one word education will be enough.
Heartened to see the infusion of young girls and young women into education institutions, and often they excel.
Thank you. Danish Khan Abdul Majid and Yasmin Najmuddin. Any one of them?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Just a very quick, short question. How different is this regime from others in terms of the treatment of the media?
Oh, we've seen censorship before during the emergency. I'm old enough to remember that. Okay. So we have seen, and in states also, we have seen pressure on the media and intimidation. For example, in my state, Tamil Nadu, the Jayalalitha government launched hundreds of criminal defamation cases. Not that they really intended to take them to the finish, but to put pressure on the media and particularly on the proprietors, it happens. So it's not new. But generally, my tribe believes that this is more systematic and on a larger scale across the country than we've seen before, barring the emergency period. The emergency was different. It was total. And as Mr. Advani famously said, when you are asked to bend, you crawled. So it's not new for me.
Thank you. Who was that?
Abdul Majid.
Okay,
Abdul Majid here, sir. Sir, greetings to all. When mob lynchings, a crime like mob lynchings are happening in the streets of India, sir, I surprised why our intellectuals, professors, university chancellors, and public coming to the street with candles and, protesting against it. It is repeating again and again. I surprise it, sir. Why not in a civil society? Such things should not be happen. No?
I agree with you, yeah. But I think the number has declined in recent period. We don't have total data on this, but lynchings are so horrible and so barbaric that a lot of people speak out against it. But as for candlelight processions and so on, that's one way of calling attention to it and protesting against it. It's a good way. But people have different ways of raising their voice against these atrocities.
Thank you, Ramsa.
I don't think people are silent on lynchings. It's in the press, and there's a lot of criticism and condemnation of it.
Thank you, Ramsa. Yasmin Najmuddin, Fatima Muzaffar, A. Wasim, Pichan PC. So go ahead, any one of them. Yasmin Najmuddin, please.
Good evening, Mr. Ram. Wonderful analysis and explanation. It's not a question, but it's a request that we need follow-up discussions on this. Otherwise it is just going to be a one-time issue. And my focus would be on how would we Muslim women, like you were talking about a lot of Muslim women participating in educational programs, in which way could we make a difference? And the main thing is, I would feel that, we need tolerance amongst all religions and people of all faiths. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's one of my favorite topics. And I have lots of Muslim friends in Chennai. And we always, wherever I get a chance, we sort of tell the women, even instigate them, that assert your rights within your family. And many of them want to do it, but there is a sort of traditional haze hanging over this. But I've seen many of them do that. They should assert their rights. Education is one way they are advancing. Definitely, no question about it. But we see a lot of disparities and inequalities in the intra-family relationships, even in educated families. and the, you can say it's culturally predetermined and so on, but the kind of, segregation that takes place between men and women and so on. I think all this should change, and you don't leave it to nature to bring about the change. There should be an element of assertion, fighting for it, these rights.
Thank you.
And also, I think the laws need some change, not by being imposed from above, but coming from within, and particularly from the. I think there's a tremendous potential there.
Thank you, Ram Saab. Fatima Muzaffar, please unmute yourself, or Faisal, and A. Wasim, Ichan PC, and Azhar Wahab. Okay, Fatima, please.
Yes, sir. Fatima here from Chennai.
Go ahead.
Thanks for the opportunity. Proud to say that I'm a Chennite since Mr. Ram sir spoke today. My question to Mr. Ram, since this is an international forum here, what can the international community do to help the Indians? Because this is not just a Muslim issue. It's a secular India or a Hindutva India. So I just want to pose a question to Ram sir. How can the international community help India in remaining secular?
I think there is a lot of good material being published in the newspaper, in the digital sources I read, whether it's the BBC or the Guardian or the New York Times or the Washington Post, which I read regularly, or the Financial Times. I think there's plenty of material there, not just one-sidedly criticizing what's happening or in any biased way, but holding Indian performance up to certain high standards. For example, on the articles that I've read on the so-called anti-campaign against love jihad, which is a travesty of the law and everything that we know, as Justice Madan Lokur has pointed out in this article I referred to. So I think there is plenty out there. Perhaps more voices coming from more diverse sources in a constructive way, not in a way that immediately enables them to say, oh, they're hostile, they are our enemies and so on, but in a constructive way, in a persuasive way, to hold them to account and point out how you're deviating from not some abstract goal or value you laid down, but what has been laid down in the Constitution. And so on. I think that more can be done, but I think some of it is being done. And I'm very pleased to see some of the press, takes on what is happening in India. They're not getting a great press, those who try to subvert these institutions and so on. So, it's somewhat different from the reactions during the emergency, I think. And some of these foreign newspapers and media were not particularly critical of what is happening in India. But today, everything is known instantly, and there's a lot of information out there on which you base your constructive criticism.
Thank you, Ram Saab. I just wanted to let everyone know that we have 10 or maybe 12 more minutes to go. And then we will wrap up with the Razi Bhai's comment. And Ram Saab, is it all right? Or I can imagine it's very late in India.
No, I'm a night bird, no problem.
Thank you so much. A. Wasim and Pichan PC and Azhar Wahab. And okay, go ahead. Any one of them, Faisal?
Yeah, I think many Azhar Wahab and A. Wasim are not there anymore.
Okay, Sayyid Sadat.
He's also not there anymore.
Okay, Azim Khan, Hidayat.
Pichan?
Yes. Pichan, you are back. Please
okay,
go ahead.
yes. My name is Amir Pichan. I'm joining the meeting from Vienna, Austria, in Central Europe. And thank you very much for the very informative sessions. And I have got just one question. How does the CAA is going to affect the OCI card holders or people of what we call as the overseas citizen of India? We had citizenship once, and of course, through a part of life, we moved across and to other part of the globe and got a citizenship elsewhere. And we still kept the Indian roots. We have got parents, properties, everything over there. And how does this CA is going to affect the people of with OCA card, especially from the minority background?
Thank you.
Yeah, as far as I can see, it will not have any impact on those who hold. Although under the rules, they have made provision for withdrawing this or canceling this if you make certain statements which are considered hostile to the country and so on. This was there before, and they have been expanded. In other words, more scope for arbitrary executive action in this. But the CAA itself has no direct bearing on the rights of OCI holders, overseas citizens of India. I think it's a good thing that has happened that permits barring certain exclusions such as owning agricultural land and so on, OCI card holders and barring the right to vote. The OCI card holders, I think, are in a good position to refresh their roots, keep in continuous touch with their roots and their families in India, grow, look after and grow their properties and work in India in a relatively unrestrained way. This is a good thing that happened. And it's brought benefits to both sides. So I don't think that's going to be affected. It's
Thank you.
Or in any way I can see.
Thank you so much. Sayyid Sadat, Azim Khan, Hidayat, Muhammad Yunus, are you?
Yeah, I'm Hidayat. Yeah. Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Ram. I also happened to be in Chennai for some time before coming here. So my question is, we see every day the institutions in India are being compromised. Earlier, the judiciary was our hope. Now, election commission is also, we cannot trust it anymore, if we have to say it bluntly. How do we fight that? How do we fight against the institutions which are being infiltrated by RSS and right-wing organizations? Thank you.
I think by relentless criticism when they go off, when they go wrong, and also I think by appealing to them. For example, courts. As I mentioned briefly earlier, there have been high courts which have come out with excellent decisions on the Tabligi, the whole, the drama that surrounded it. It's a very strong judgment from a high court. And the recent instance of this young couple, Hindu woman and Muslim man being allowed to live together and build a life together, free from obstruction by either the family or the state. I think those are good things that have happened. So shouldn't give up hope in the institutions, or at least some components of them. For example, I, along with Arun Shauri, Prashant Bhushan, and we filed a challenge to the Contempt of Court Act, particular section of that provision of the Act. We withdrew it from the Supreme Court, but we now going to the Karnataka High Court to pursue this cause, because contempt of court, criminal contempt of court, is an outdated power of courts, very arbitrary, and it has to be struck down. That's I think you can go to the institution and instead of being cynical, do your best, make the right choice of where to go, when to go, how to go, with what arguments to go, and so on. So there is a lot of space out there for trying to correct these institutions. But the larger question is, those who politically try to do this have to be defeated democratically. That's the way out. And that's going to take a lot of work.
Thank you. Azim Khan, please, and Muhammad Yunus. I see Azim Khan is still there. Please go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Ram, very strong and courageous session. Congrats. My question is whether RSS and their sister group keeping any agenda for Christian, Sikh, Farsi, Jain, and so on, whether they have to be in a sweet dream or they have to be wake up and see their safety.
as you know, there have been attacks on churches and priests and nuns in the past. For example, in Orissa, but also elsewhere, there have been attacks because there's no love lost there. But for pragmatic reasons, so that you don't appear to discriminate against all minorities, they have at least temporarily come to a position where Christians have been included in those who will be given, after they go through a process, they can, illegal migrants can be given citizenship and first residential rights and political rights, so on. So they've included Christians in that group, perhaps also looking at the West and how it will look like when Christians are targeted the way Muslims are. So I think for all these reasons, they are not right now not targeted as before by the political project, but that is purely tactical. It is not strategic, because the Christians, there's been a lot of hate against Christians as well.
Thank you.
As for others you refer to, Sikhs, of course, and Jains, Buddhists, that's not much of an issue.
Thank you. So I'm just calling last few names: Muhammad Yunus, Fazur Rahman. Hold on. Fazur Rahman, Khalilur, VM Khalilur, Taj Khan, Muhammad Suleiman, Iltifat Hassan. Please go ahead one by one as in the
Yunus is available. Yunus is available here.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Ram, in your speech, you have mentioned that a lot of non-Muslims migrants from the Assam have not find their names in the list. So how could you say that the Citizen Amendment Bill is only against the Muslims? So how could we counter it, BJP?
Because for the first time, there is a religious difference has been made a basis for giving citizenship. It's very clear. It's in the Act itself, the Citizenship Amendment Act. Whereas illegal migrants, as they are called, who are not Muslims, and have the right to go through this process and get citizenship. And the fiction they have adopted is that anyone other than a Muslim who comes to India is fleeing oppression in those countries. Whether you're talking about Bangladesh, and you're talking largely about Bangladesh in this case. So, but in Assam, as I mentioned, I think perhaps you were not there when I went into it. There was this anti-foreigner movement, and the Assamese agitators, starting with students, did not make any distinction on religious grounds between the so-called foreigner, read Bengali, and as it happened, a lot of the people who are considered illegal migrants were Hindus who could not have the documentation to prove their right to citizenship.
Thank you.
But Muslims have also suffered, particularly the poorest among them, and the intention is to target Muslims and to confer citizenship rights after they go through a process on everyone else who's come over according to official claims from across the border from Bangladesh.
Next is Fazur Rahman, and he has the same question I wanted to ask. Go ahead, Fazur Rahman. Unmute yourself. He's there. Faisal, please check.
I have requested twice. He's not responding. VM Khalilur is ready, so you can ask.
Okay, go ahead. VM Khalilur.
Yes, Mr. Ram, I am from Chennai. Thank you for your thought-provoking presentation. I want to know about the speech delivered by our Prime Minister Modi ji at the Aligarh Muslim University. Had he been a secular person in the university only? Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's well known that they say different things to different audiences. And even if you look at election manifestos, in 2014, they came to power largely on the agenda of development. They didn't even mention the NRC or what became the Citizenship Amendment Bill in that manifesto. But once they strengthened themselves in power, they came out with a full-fledged program on citizenship. So I think you speak in different voices and with different messages to different constituencies. This is very well known in politics, so I'm not surprised. They'll always claim to be secular, but talk about genuine secularism versus pseudo-secularism. That is a specialty of Mr. Advani.
This is a politics. Yeah, this politics. Iltafat and Taj Khan. Iltafat Hassan, please unmute yourself, or Faisal. It should be by name Sadia Hassan.
Okay, screen name is helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, because there's Sadia Hassan.
Yeah, I requested him.
And Taj Khan, if you are ready, or Mohammed Suleiman.
So, Rafat, I'm ready.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. So, Mr. Ram, both Modi and Trump have completely mishandled the COVID situation. Modi has also mishandled the economy. He's doing very badly on that front. Both of these guys are selling themselves on racism, whether it is anti-Muslim or anti-immigrant or people of color. Trump just barely lost the election, and Modi still has 80% popularity in India. I feel they're both playing the game played by the likes of Mussolini and Hitler. And Second World War had to be fought to get rid of them. For me, it's a very scary situation that their supporters keep their eyes closed, their ears closed, and they just listen to the nonsense they speak. Thank you. How do we handle this?
I think these comparisons, we have to be very careful in making these comparisons or these analogies. I think if you look at just factually at the handling of the pandemic, Trump was terrible. You can say that, because he was in denial, and I think they lost many opportunities and so on. And I think he's paid a heavy price for this, notwithstanding the economy doing relatively well before the pandemic was there. So I read those newspapers, and I'm not surprised that he paid a heavy price. And it doesn't look that close when you look at the share of the popular vote. The BJP itself has got only 37% of the popular vote in India in the Lok Sabha election, by no means close to a majority. And I agree that so the one aspect of the pandemic, the impact on the economy and livelihood, was terribly handled. And everyone saw what happened to the migrant workers. The world was horrified to see those scenes. And despite that, they kept winning elections. That's a fact. But there is a difference in the handling of the health issue. There was an early lockdown. Some of it was very harsh, but it was implemented. There was no dispute. Nobody questioned the use of masks, and of course it was not provided enough early. But Prime Minister Modi did not say that you, in a libertarian way, that you don't need masks, or himself appear without masks and so on. They also, they followed at least propagated the disciplines required to cope with the present health crisis, the health aspect of the crisis. So I think there is a real difference there if you have to look at it closely. I think generally, the general assessment is that the lockdowns limited the early transmission, but did not prevent it. And the failure to test adequately, use good tests adequately, meant that the number of infections is at least 20 times, according to WHO estimates, probably that, the number of reported cases of COVID-19. And yet the death rates are significantly lower than they are in the US and other developing countries. They are underestimated, the mortality rate. But from what we know from hospitals and so on, they're not being overwhelmed the way we hear they are in some parts of in large parts of the United States and certainly the UK. So there is something somewhat different in this. The comparisons with fascism or fascist leaders, Hitler and Mussolini, these are natural when there is lynching or pogroms and so on, but I would deliberately stay away from making those comparisons. For one reason, for one thing, they're not accurate. I don't think we are in a state where, the Nazi party's hold was quite different from what has happened in India. Maybe there are some semi-fascistic tendencies, but we don't have fascism in India right now. To believe in that would mean that you are defenseless.
Yeah.
They will demoralize, apart from underestimating the prospects, the positive spaces and opportunities that exist for resistance and opposing these. I think you'll also be demoralized. So I don't think it's very helpful to draw those comparisons. They will be made.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your clarification. I am of the same opinion. Muhammad Suleiman Taj Khan. Suleiman Saab, please go ahead.
Yeah. Good evening. This is Suleiman, environmentalist from Chennai, yet another Chennaiite. Good evening, Ram. It was a really inspiring and instigating, lightning speech. And of course, coming to NRC, NPR, CAA, demonetization, lynching, Love Jihad, Babri Masjid, say that political communal unrest all over the country. Do they really go by the strategic plans, sticking onto their agenda, or just another sheer half-baked, as many manifestos of theirs, one amongst it, right? And any way of the hate by entire nation, as one may have it, right from defense to right whatnot. Any class of people are not happy here now at point in time, be it Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, Jains, or whomsoever. But by any chance, do they really have the chance to complete the tenure of this regime of another 4 years? Another thing is coming to.
It's a very long question, so please.
What happened is it's got frozen.
I would expect the BJP at the center to complete its term and Narendra Modi to remain as Prime Minister for this term. Surprising things could happen. It could happen first at the state level. In some states, it almost happened in Bihar, but I think Narendra Modi's campaigning at the last minute swung it in favor of the BJP and allies. But it was a pretty close thing. Put it on another way. It happened in other Hindi-speaking states earlier. So I think the breaches will come in these in the states where they think they are very strong. And so I think this may, but we are hoping for that in 2019, and people who were hoping for a secular outcome were very disappointed. Some of them got dejected, but I think you've got to play the long game. No guarantees that they will not come for another term, but there's a good chance that it can be prevented and so on. So I think there are lots of opportunities in India, which is such a vast and diverse country, very mixed up, to get us out of this toxic political situation.
Thank you, Ram Saab. And there are only 3 more people left. And I ask you, just ask a 30-second question. And then Razi Bhai will wrap up. And those who wants to ask their question can submit to Razi Bhai, and you have the email. You receive the notification. So submit the question and we will forward to Ram Saab. If you are really interested to ask the question. Next person is Taj Khan. After that, Nigar Fatma, and the last one is Abdul Subhan.
Thank you very much, sir. This is Taj from Saudi Arabia, sir. Sir, in your experience, what is the best way for Indians in general and Muslim in particular to tackle the situations? Sir, you have suggested some measures like, for example, joining political parties or mainstream, but it will take a lot of time, sir. What are the shortest measures possible, in your opinion, sir?
Thank you.
Very much.
The shortest way is, I think, to be first clear on what we are dealing with and what has gone wrong, for which I think you need to look into things like these values mentioned in the Constitution, look at our history to the extent you have the time to research it or read about it, and come to a clear understanding of where we are and what has gone wrong and why. And I think that is good progress. If that clarity emerges, I think the action will follow. And it has to be constructive action that corrects the situation, not a cynical attitude or an exaggerated reading of the situation, which would be, oh, we become fascist, in which case there's no hope. As was pointed out, you needed a Second World War and the death of many millions of people to get rid of those fascist leaders. Hitler. We're not, there's no comparison between then and now.
Thank you, Ram Saab. Nigar Fatma, and lastly, Abdul Subhan. Nigar, please, you are unmuted. Go ahead.
Yes. Hello, Mr. Ram. This is Nigar from Saudi Arabia. Actually, my question is...
we lost you.
She got muted accidentally, looks like.
Razibai, you are muted. You were saying something? Yeah, go ahead, Nigar, please.
Yes, yes, sir. So Constitution is the king of king. So now the Parliament has gone beyond that. The basic structure doctrine has gone for a toss. Democracy has gone for a toss. I mean, universities has attacked, and then military has involved. So this all proves that like everything is out of control. I believe, at least I believe that international countries, the support of international country and the capitalists in India. So when we have the strong support of these, these kind of power, how does a common man fight being minority against all these? I think it looks extremely complicated and to think of these. So what is your take on this, and can you provide some solution? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Nigar.
What is happening? I don't think it's as bad as you describe. There are ways of resisting democratically, peacefully in this, and I think it's being done. So I'm not as pessimistic as the impression you have got.
Okay, thank you. Lastly, Abdul Subhan, and then Razibai will wrap up with this question.
Yeah, good evening to you, sir. Myself, Abdul Subhan from Chennai. Actually, from right from the beginning, from this government, from 2014 onwards, I noticed and come to a conclusion. The first inning of the government, as you say in your conclusion part, especially targeting a particular, dividing the people into two origins by religion. But if you see the second innings of the government, we can very much understand that they are not at all specifying the religious part. They are very much putting people in one side. They don't want to keep religion. They want to dominate the country, putting all the religions behind the step down. In such case, what is your comment on this, sir?
I have nothing to say on that.
Okay, thank you, Ram Saab, and my apologies, sincere apologies to those whose questions or comments cannot be accommodated, because we already had a 75-minute question answer session. So, and thank you so much to Ram Saab to take all the questions, and we really appreciate. And Razi Bhai will wrap up with a few words, and thanks from my side, Ram Saab. Razi Bhai, back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. You asked for it, that, you are a night bird and so you can stay, but I can see that you've gone too much and too far. And as is the case, I think you are too much in demand, and you have really opened up yourself a situation where we have to bring you back, at least request you to come back again on some Saturday, and we maybe reformat this with others also to have town hall type settings where only questions and answers be the session rather than a talk, and that will be, I think I will be requesting you soon. And so, what should I say? There are so many questions already asked. The only thing I will ask is, you mentioned repeatedly, and we know that West India and South Indian Muslims are doing so well in all ways. Educationally, politically, they look more in mainstream. And the larger part of Muslim population, which lives in the northern part or the central part, is really in a very pathetic situation. Is this largely due to the partition effect is still hindering, because most of the playing field was in the north and center, and migration and all the landlords and all those feudalism, everything, destruction. So how can we really learn from South, or should we have some kind of thing where the situation changes?
I think it's part of the overall development of these states and the region itself, these regions. And I think the position of Muslims is largely, as far as I know, I don't know enough about the situation in all parts, but I think it's part of that development. And actually that kind of integration has actually happened. Take population growth rates, for example. It's a myth that the Muslim population growth rate is higher, or the fertility rate is higher than elsewhere. It depends on their class. If they come from a very poor family, it will be higher. But when they get educated and advance in many ways, it naturally comes down. So I see a lot in that way. Integration has taken place, but much more is to happen. There are also political factors, more toxic environments in the Hindi-speaking states than in even Maharashtra, which certainly turned a major surprise after the election was done. The last assembly election was done, and we are having elections in Tamil Nadu and Kerala and Pondicherry, of course, very soon in April, May 2021, this year. And I think it'll be very interesting to see the outcomes. The Hindutva forces have no base whatsoever in Tamil Nadu. They tried to play up Rajnikant, or they couldn't make up their mind between him and AIDMK, and he's now opted out. And we're still left with the dominance of the two Dravidian movement parties. Whatever their faults, they've kept Hindutva away, which I think is a great contribution. So I think, but the answer to, I think the question is, it's Muslims having part of this development or the lack of development, depending on the region and the state.
All right. So this